Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. The summer break is officially upon us and the rumour mill is starting to churn as to what we're going to see different when we get to Zandvoort after the break concludes. Rumour has it that Mercedes will be bringing substantial further upgrades, but they might need to change tack somewhat after Toto Wolff confirmed the new updates they brought to Spa brought the bouncing problem back in force to their car they experienced mainly with last year's W14. They might need to make some adjustments, and he also admitted they still don't fully understand their car. Not exactly a great situation for them to challenge Red Bull at all this year and even going into next season. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. You guys probably saw this already, but another one bites the dust here. Lando Norris has taken down a couple of trophies lately, but this is Red Bull's fault, as you guys can see in this image when they do their shoot and as they run away. This Vamos Checo P2 sign comes over and collapses on this trophy and it smashes apart. So yeah, Lando can't be blamed for this one. Another update for you guys as well. Carlos Sainz doubled down on his perspective on the first lap incident with Oscar Piastri into turn 1 at La Source. And so look, we talked about it yesterday. It's a bit of a tricky one. I think that Sainz did lock up going into the corner. Maybe Piastri should have been a bit more cautious, but he went for the move. And Sainz said what he said. He basically said that Oscar was a bit inexperienced and therefore he made that move. And you know, this is the type of thing that is usually said in the heat of the moment after the race is over and is very rarely doubled down upon in post-race discussions. But Sainz does this tweet yesterday, not what we wanted today. Racing instant. So racing instant implies nobody's at fault, but it is the other guy's fault in Sainz's opinion, because he says, but Oscar was too optimistic, and he doubles down even further. He was never side by side and that move has never really worked in Spa. Congrats to the team and Charles on an encouraging result. But I mean, yeah, this is incredible, right? It's very rare that you see a driver, especially one that probably most people consider to be in the wrong for this incident, and I can totally see why, actually go, yeah, it was Oscar's fault and I'm tired of apologizing or pretending that it wasn't. So, I mean, yeah, that's a very rare instance, but I mean, yeah, Sainz isn't making too many friends, I think, with this one over the last couple of days. A big update as well on the engines for 2026. There's been some rumors lately that Mercedes are ahead of the curve. Red Bull might be struggling somewhat, but there will be some degree of equalization going into 2026, where if an engine builder is behind the curve by 3% or more, they'll be given extra time in the test benchmarks to improve their engine and catch up. So 3% is still a relatively significant, waiver in a way, because let's say it's 1,000 horsepower, that's 970 horsepower is your 3%, and 30 horsepower is a pretty, it's going to give you at least a couple of tenths a lap. So it is important, but it's not going to be mega. Like, we're not going to see Mercedes turn up in 2026 with the rocket ship they had in 2014. That is unlikely to be possible based on the understanding here. But there still will be some benefit from having a better engine. In an ideal world, maybe all the engines are the same across the teams in terms of power, but we know that's not really how it is, and this year's Alpine is apparently down quite significantly compared to the other power units that are on a relatively even playing field. The Red Bull seems to be the best, then the Ferrari, then the Mercedes in terms of raw power output, and especially from like an electricity or energy deployment perspective, the Red Bull has been very strong for some time now, which I also think is one of the reasons why their DRS looks so good, is that their deployment is so effective that their car just go, like when they turn the overtake button on, the Red Bull is just rapid. And I think it's the same with the Alfa Tauri to some degree as well, with the power unit they have. Also on Mercedes though, Frederick Vesti, who I believe was the leader in the Formula 2 championship until yesterday, when he somehow binned it on the reconnaissance lap. I'm pretty sure that's what happened anyway. I didn't actually see the incident, but Vesti didn't start the race up for some reason. So I think Porsche took the lead of the championship possibly, but he'll be in the car in Mexico for FP1. So, big runoffs, rookie driver in the car, that's what they do, and they usually do it towards the end of the season. But let's talk about the Belgian Grand Prix and why Mercedes were slower than they thought. Their car this year was roughly 0.8 of a second behind what Max Verstappen was doing over the course of the race. That is nowhere near, obviously, the pace of the Red Bull, especially when Max says that he wasn't really pushing, as he doesn't usually, because you want to preserve the tyres. And that's also one of the reasons why the Red Bull looks so fast and so consistent, is that it's good at conserving its tyres, and their drivers, especially Max, tracks at the moment are very good at conserving their tyres, so they always have pace in hand if they require it. And despite it maybe not being the greatest for the sport, you've got to say fair play with what Red Bull and Verstappen are presently doing. And even as Toto Wolff says, he has all the reasons to be cheeky. He's driving circles around everybody else on merit. You've got to watch that. As much as it is annoying, you've got to say fair play to what they're achieving. And Mercedes thought they were going to take a pretty significant step forward this weekend. And compared to how bad they were at this track last year, maybe they did to some degree, but they still weren't great, especially with the bouncing. Now, you can actually see this on the onboard of Hamilton's fastest lap from the Grand Prix. When down the Kemmel Straight, that car is porpoising, bouncing up and down again. Not just on the straights, but also a bit in the corners and an issue under braking, which is pretty remarkable. What it does probably mean is that they've added a significant amount of downforce onto the car. And this has been the big talking point from Mercedes, that they said, I think a couple of weeks ago now, they've solved all their issues, and now it's about adding downforce to the car and adding performance. That's the stage they're currently in. Probably far too late to arrive to that stage, but that's where they are nonetheless. But maybe they haven't solved all their problems, and Mercedes seem so confused about this. One race they'll say, oh yeah, we've done it, the car is aligning with what our data says, we understand the machine, and now we're on track to challenge Red Bull in a few races' time. And then 2 races later they say, well actually, we've encountered a bit of an issue here with one of our upgrades, and all of a sudden we don't fully understand exactly what's going on. So Toto Wolff confirmed that indeed there was bouncing in the race. The car is just bouncing literally every single straight, even Blanchimont, so that's the corner, so towards the end of the lap you come out of Stavlo 1 and 2, and you're going down towards the bus stop chicane. This is in sector 3, and there's you go right, then you go left, and there's a bit of a tighter left-hander that in modern Formula 1 cars is easily flat. But Hamilton had to lift in that corner, as I think did Russell. Maybe Russell didn't because he had a bit more downforce, but still, that's an easy flat corner. But the car was bouncing, the car was unstable, he had to lift off. That's costing a lot of lap time. And also because the car is bouncing up and down on the tyres, it overheats the tyres under braking, a vicious cycle, and was tossing them a lot of time. He says it was the main limiting factor this weekend. So on one side it might be positive, because that sounds to me like it's costing them a lot of performance, a good few tenths of a second, which would probably have put them faster than the Ferrari in race pace if they didn't have this issue. But they do have this issue, and it's back on the car. Now, porpoising is like a natural effect in some degree of the way these cars are designed. If you maximize downforce and you try and run the car as close to the floor as you can, this type of effect will happen. The engineers have resolved it on most of the teams over the last couple of years, but if you really push the ride heights, you might get this problem back, especially if your car's now generating more downforce than they expected. So this could be a positive or a negative, but it certainly can't be too positive if they don't really understand what's going on. As he says, they've got to understand the data a bit more, and also says that the flaw could have been the reason why we've been bouncing, but we're going to see it in the data, and maybe there's something we need to find, but I still believe the direction they're going in is the correct one. So Toto Wolff still reckons that this development avenue they've taken with the upgrades they brought, the new front wing in Silverstone, and then more recently the changes to the side pods and the new rear wing and the floor edge changes in Spa, are the way to go and have taken the team forwards and will continue to do so. But now the car is bouncing again. We had a lot of bouncing this weekend. Both Lewis and George said they bounced on the brakes and it hit the tyres. It limited their pace. We had an upgrade that added downforce, but maybe that wasn't good. And this is a really interesting piece, that you think more downforce is better, and it is to a certain degree, but you want to ensure the downforce is coming from the right place, because the Red Bull generates a lot of downforce from its floor and has no such porpoising issues, whereas the Mercedes have added downforce, but it seems to be bringing back some bouncing problems. So as he says, we have to put our heads together to figure out why. The problem is the downforce measurement tool that was worked for the last 10 years no longer works. So why is that reflected in the data? So again, that's what I'm saying, right? Every other race, Mercedes say, oh, we've got it covered, boys. We know what's going on. No problem at all. We're going to be beating Red Bull first race 2024. Okay, I don't think they've said that, but that's the implication. But and now they're like, well, actually, this downforce measurement analysis tool that used to work perfectly well pre-ground effect era from 2022 is now problematic. And what it's telling us is not what it actually is. Now, this might be a solution that they solve by changing the ride heights and bringing some new things. Maybe they need a floor upgrade. Maybe they've got one coming after the summer break, because that is the rumour that they do have, and they still believe they're on the right trajectory here. But definitely not a great thing for Mercedes to be suffering with. But they also say, or at least Amos has reported during the weekends, that there will be a major coordinated package in addition to the Belgian upgrades. So Mercedes are spending a lot of money, obviously, on this year's upgrades, but in part they want to ensure they work for next year's car, and the rules are the same for this year and next year. So everything you update to this year's car will be beneficial to next year's car as well. But the rumour has it that after Spa, where they brought big changes, they have big further parts to come with a large coordinated package. Now, maybe they'll have to reconsider what they're doing, just because I don't think they expected the car to be porpoising on the straights again, which it was. So that's a bit of a concern. But if it is a new floor they bring in, maybe it's not too bad. But I think Mercedes probably understand where this has come from or what they need to do to fix it to some respects. But the idea that their downforce measurement tool is not spitting out the numbers that it does in reality is still a concern, because that was a major talking point throughout the entirety of 2022. And they said a couple of times during that season, oh, we've fixed it, our car correlates all of a sudden. And turns out that it still kind of doesn't. And if that's the case now, 18 months into this cycle of regulations, there is little hope that Mercedes can get back on track by the end of the season, and even next year, right? And if you look at the last 14 seasons in Formula 1, the winners have been Red Bull or Mercedes. That's how it's been. And Mercedes are the team, as far as I'm concerned, that next season and the season after that can be a threat to Red Bull and Max Verstappen. And if they fail to deliver, then the championships are already going to go one way, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not convinced that Aston or Ferrari, I mean, look, it's nice to have faith in Ferrari, but at some point you just get disappointed too many times, or McLaren can actually do enough to challenge Red Bull. So I think in terms of a title fight between multiple teams next year, it's probably again going to come down to Mercedes, and this isn't exactly the most promising signs coming out of that team. But maybe after the summer break in Zandvoort, things will be different. They should be pretty good there. They were good there last year. The Mercedes was rather competitive, maybe even surprisingly so. It was incredibly good on its tyres last year as well. So very much enjoyed to hear your perspective in the comment section below. Just wanted to close out with a quite interesting stat here, actually. This is median teammate gaps in 2023, with the exception of Hülkenberg Magnussen, which is the mean, but everything else is medians. So the biggest is Alonso Stroll, maybe expectedly so, then Albon Sargents. Verstappen finishes on average 11.5 seconds ahead of Perez. Probably the most impressive here is Hamilton and Russell, to be fair, like 6.6 seconds average ahead of another top driver as far as I'm concerned. Bottas on Zhou, Norris 4 seconds ahead of Pastry, Ocon slightly ahead of Gasly, and then Leclerc only very marginally ahead of Sainz. So pretty interesting comparison there between the teammates and their relative performances. There's of course outliers and other factors in play, but I thought it was interesting to look at so far this season. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.